Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. Today my name is still Isaiah for the time being, and it is Sinday. I have been watching a lot of Jojo's Bizarre Adventures, like maybe too much to consume within a week, and it made me think about, well, the Bible's personal Jojo. He is a man named Samson, and he happens to be right out of the book of Judges. So I don't actually expect anyone who isn't in some denomination of Christianity to really know who Samson is. But if you were or are a Christian, you definitely know who he is because he is one of the favorite Bible stories for kids all over. But for people who don't know, the book of Judges is from the Old Testament, and it kind of goes through a period where Israel and Israel's people would sort of look away from God. God would be like, oh, fuck you, punish them. Then he would raise a judge, a leader, to kind of get them back on the right path. And that kind of happens over and over and over and over again because apparently the early Israelites just didn't know what the fuck to do. And God's just, I don't know. It's when you actually look at the whole thing, it's insane. Just everything about it is insane. But Samson is one of the last judges, according to the mythology within the Old Testament. I say mythology because there's a lot of arguments about whether or not the events of Judges even happened, or if the judges that were elected were ever like proper leaders of all the tribes, or if they were just like leaders within their own society. And there's a lot of back and forth about it, and I don't really care. It's a Bible story. For Samson, again, he's the last judge in the book, and he was born when the Philistines were sort of being the ones punishing the Israelites for God, because God can't do shit on his own. Apparently, he has to use all the people. There's a lot about Samson that isn't actually gone over in Sunday school because he goes through some weird ass shit. First off, again, born during the time of Philistine, and before he was born, his parents were having issues conceiving, and an angel came down to his mom and was like, hey, if you do these things and if you promise he takes a Nazarite vow, then Samson, you will have a son. And the husband's like, wait, what? You talked to a fucking angel? And the angel came down to him and was like, dude, I talked to your wife. Why are you not believing her? And dude, the dad was like, oh shit, this is true. Try to give him an offering. Angel's like, no, the only offering goes to God. Set the offering on fire and then disappeared in the smoke up to the heavens. So that's the start of it. And a lot of people, because of this whole miraculous birth thing, ended up comparing him to Jesus later on. So after that, he was born, and his mom made him take the Nazarite vow from birth. What is the Nazarite vow? The most important ones here is the fact that Samson was never allowed to cut his hair, and he also couldn't take part of like unclean foods or handle a corpse or even be near a burial. So all of that fun stuff. So it's a type of vow that people Jewish people could choose to make, but the hair is the most important. The hair and the unclean foods and corpses. Those are the most important ones, with the hair being the most important one for Samson. So Samson grows up, and he eventually catches sight of a Philistine woman, and he's like, oh shit, she's hot. I want to marry her. His parents are like, dude, don't marry her. He's like, no, I want to marry her. And during this whole back and forth thing, he also comes across a lion and proceeds to rip the lion in half. Because what has happened is, because Samson has agreed to this Nazarite vow, God has granted him this immense strength. And he is strong enough that he literally, most depictions of him rending this lion in half is taking the jaws and ripping in half from there. Like, even in kids' Bibles, it's insane. So during this whole back and forth with the Philistine woman, he's like, okay, cool, I'm going to also rip this lion in half. And he later finds that this lion corpse also has a beehive in it with honey. And he's like, dude, I fucking love honey. And he brought the honey back to his parents as well. Eventually, his parents give in and he's allowed to marry the Philistine woman. And he starts to go through it. The Philistines, during their wedding ceremony, offers him 30 groomsmen. And he's like, cool, I got these random groomsmen. I'm going to give them a riddle. And he does, but they can't figure it out because his riddle is like about the lion. It's like, from strength comes sweet sort of deal. And they're all like, well, fuck, we're not going to be able to solve this riddle. And to get if we solve the riddle, we get like new clothes. And if we don't solve the riddle, we have to give him new clothes. So they go to his would-be wife and it's like, hey, help us solve the riddle. And the wife is like, okay, cool, I'm going to ask Samson, hey, Samson, let me know what the fuck your riddle's about. Like, you're going to marry me, I might as well know. And he's like, okay, all right, it has to do with this story. I found a lion, I tore him in two, and then he had a beehive with honey. That's the answer to the riddle. And she's like, what the fuck? All right. Tells the groomsman. The groomsman tells him. And he's like, oh, fuck you. You guys figured it out because of her. And he has a temper tantrum and refuses to give them their new clothes. Sometime later, when he left, because he also was mad at his wife, and his way of dealing with that shit was to leave, he comes back and finds out that his wife got married off to someone else. In response, he proceeds to gather 300 foxes, ties their tails together, and sets them on fire through the Philistine village. And in addition to that, he also ends up killing his wife and her family. So that's fun. In the meantime, you have to remember, he's supposed to be a judge. He's supposed to be a leader that leads people out of the Philistines' clutches. And he is, well, there's definite parallels to Heracles, which I will talk about later. So after all of that, he ends up meeting a lady named Delilah. And this story is actually from Sunday school. Delilah was kind of a hoe. Who was sent by the Philistine officials. At least that's how the Bible portrays her, is that she was a kind of a whore who was bribed to figure out Samson's weakness because he's going to fuck up all this shit. Philistines are like, we need to take him out. So Delilah is like, cool, hey Samson, you're so fucking hot and you're so fucking strong. What is your secret? And he's like joking around. He's like, well, I get my gift from God. If anyone was ever to tie me with like new bowstrings, I would definitely be weak. And I nearly forgot to mention, during all of this, before he met Delilah, he's also like killed a bunch of people with a donkey jaw. So like the Philistines know he'd be strong. Delilah also know that he'd be strong. I mean, they're fucking, so I would imagine that came up at some point. So she gets people to tie him up with bowstrings, and he breaks them. The next night, according to the story, she's like, hey, that was funny, but really, what's your secret? And he's like, oh, well, if you tie me up with new rope, I will be rendered weak. And so she does that, and this completely ignores the fact that when he killed everyone with the donkey jaw, he was tied up with new rope. And he wakes up the next day and tears apart the rope. And is like, haha, that's hilarious. What are you doing? The next night, he's like, Delilah's like, hey, so really, what's going on? What gives you your power? And he's like, oh, it's my hair, my fabulous long dreads. If anyone is ever to cut it, then I would lose all my power. So then she calls a servant over and he gets his hair cut off, which does weaken him. So he ends up getting turned over to the Philistines, who end up gouging out his eyes, and he's forced to grind grain. While he's there, his hair does start growing back because apparently the Philistines are like, cool, we cut it off once, never going to happen again. And we're doing a total Disney Rapunzel situation here. It's not going to matter. And at one point, they decide, you know what? We are going to make fun of this guy even more. And they take him from the mill to one of their temples, and Samson is allowed to rest against one of the pillars. After he is allowed, he ends up praying to God to be like, hey, can I have my powers back? My hair has grown out again. Is like almost like I never even cut it off to begin with. And God's like, okay, sure. And he actually recovers his strength and pulls down the columns, collapsing the temple and killing all of the Philistines as well as himself. So that's the Jojo of the Bible, one of them at least. It's pretty intense, and I can't help but notice certain parallels to a very certain Heracles, also known in Western society as Hercules, because we have two people who were gifted with amazing strength through kind of miraculous births. One being a miracle through an angel and through God's divine will, and the other one being kind of a bastard child from Zeus. There are other gods who absolutely are plotting against them because, I mean, the Philistines have Dagon and other gods, and if anyone's familiar with Greek mythology, the fact that Zeus is a fucking man whore and Hera hates it is no surprise to anyone. And actually, Heracles' name comes from Hera, because he's like, cool, I am going to be awesome despite all the shit you throw at me. They both kill their first wives. Like Hercules, the Disney movie with Meg, that's his first wife, and Hera makes him go insane and kills his wife and children. And because of that, he ends up going through the 7 trials, and that's also when he kills his lion. So they both end up killing lions, and they both end up choosing to die after being betrayed by a woman. It also feels mildly gaslighty that Samson like trusted Delilah and then still ends up getting his hair cut and thus his powers are lost. And it's just bizarre to me that God would just immediately change his mind like months later and be like, all right, cool, you've been punished enough, time to kill yourself with pillars. And I don't know, just it's always felt weird to me that Delilah ended up being such a villain. And I never noticed before, but women tend to be the villains in a lot of stories. The only good story I can think of is the story of Esther, which we can talk about later because even that has its drawbacks. But it's a pretty wild Bible story, and there's a couple of them in there, especially the Old Testament, because it's like you've got this Hercules motherfucker, dumb as a brick apparently, completely guided by his loins, and he's meant to be the last of the judges. These great people that get lifted up to help lead the Israelites out of horrible times. And yeah, I mean, even the Wikipedia mentions that this is sort of a folk hero story that sounds a lot like Enkidu and Heracles and all of these other himbo stories where they're driven insane by the gods and end up coming back and doing one last great feat before they die. But I wanted to share that story because it doesn't really seem like one that you would see much outside of the church. And it's especially hilarious to me that people like to compare Samson to Jesus, because Jesus is meant to be a sort of taking it on the chin, turning the other cheek sort of fellow, whereas Samson will fucking light foxes on fire and send them through your neighborhood because he got angry. that he like let his would-be wife get married when he's the one that walked away from her. So that's how it is. But anyway, I hope y'all just enjoyed this little Bible story. And let me know what your favorite insane Bible stories might be, because Lord, it's insane. That book just has so much in it. But yeah, that's it for Sinday. Talking about hoes and all that shit. I will talk to y'all tomorrow. Stay hydrated. Bye.